You can see my screen all right?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. All right, so the first example that I'm going to get started with is one of the scenarios that Amanda mentioned on employees that might be getting paid after their end date. Okay, so in our conversations with that Amanda and I were having about this, so often we're trying to bring data together from different sources. And so that is one of the things that I'm going to incorporate in this. Let's say I have data in a universe and my other set of data, for example, my employee data is in another universe or another system maybe, and I have to work with some way of putting that data together. In this case, I exported to Excel a set of data for my employees, and that's what I'm going to use to bring in for this. So I'm going to start off. I have a universe data here that's bringing back by year the revenue for each employee. And now I'm going to bring back, add another query with an Excel spreadsheet. And there's my employees. And I believe that's, yep, this is it. All right, looking good here. Only thing is it thinks my employee ID is a measure, which it's not. We'll make that a dimension and change the aggregation to none. And the rest looks good to go. All right, I'll run this query. And I'll insert it in the current report. I guess it thought report 2 was the current report. I'll just copy and paste this over here so you can see the two data sets side by side. Okay, so we've got our employee ID, which is the objects I'm going to use to merge or join these two data sets. And then I can combine the two different data sets and do some additional analysis. So let's start off with that. I'm going to change the arrangement of my queries to group them by query. And I will select my employee ID here and employee ID from my universe and merge that data together. All right, now that I have a merge dimension, I'm gonna add a new report just so we can start new here. And I want to be able to bring in my order year and employees and analyzer data along with their end date. So if I bring in order year and my merge dimension and my revenue, I can start off with that. And then now I have a dimension from one query. So if I want to bring in additional data, for example, the end date, and I also want to bring in the employee name in here, it won't let me bring in, following the rules of joining data in here, I can bring in additional measures or dimensions from one query or the other. And then the workaround that we have for that is making one of those additional dimensions that we want to bring in as a detail. So I'll create a new variable, which I'll call, let's do our employee name. And I'll make the qualification a detail and associate it with my merge dimension so it understands the join between my two data sets. Okay. And then in this case, I'm going to bring in the employee first name and last name and just add a space in there so that they're not right up against each other there. All right, so now that I have the employee name, I can bring employee in here. All right, so now I've got my employee. Before I go further, I'm going to turn this into a cross table. So I'll turn it into a pivot there, but it just divides up the dimensions and puts some on top and some on the side. I really don't want employee ID over here. So I can either drag it or put it over here on this. Oops, I wanted the merge dimension. And then I'll delete it from the top here. Yes, delete that row. All right, there we go. Now I can see the employees. These were really the only employees that generated revenue. But I want to also bring in this end date. So when did that employee stop working with this company? And again, I'm going to have to create another variable for that, a detailed dimension. Maybe I'll say employee end date and make it a detail associated with my merge dimension. And in this case, I just need to pop my end date. There we go. All right. Say OK. And now I can drag that into my report. Okay. So this Fred here at the top, he left the company in March of 2018 and is showing no revenue for either year. So that's fine. But this Michael McCarty, his last day was December 30th of 2018, and yet we're showing some revenue here in 2019. So that might be something worth checking out. Perhaps it's a scenario like Amanda mentioned, where perhaps he earned a commission and was due that payout, and it just happened to come out in the new year. And so that would be a fine situation. Or maybe we forgot to take him off the books and he got paid for several additional weeks in 2019. But anyway, in this case, now we can look at this and do some analysis and decide whether we need to take more action. Okay, so that's the first scenario that I wanted to talk about. The next scenario is going to be looking at our vendors that might be, or employees that might be vendors. We want to check that out. And so in this scenario, what I'm going to do is check their address and see if the address might be the same. So again, I have my vendor information that's in a universe, and I'm going to bring in my employee information in from that same Excel spreadsheet. Okay. Here's my employees. Again, we'll make that a dimension. Okay. Query. And we'll insert this in the current report. All right. So we've got vendors and we've got an employee list here. All right. Of course, in this case, obviously we don't have 13,000 employees like in Amanda's situation, but it's showing the concepts of what we can do, even with limited data here. So the first thing I'm going to do is merge the two data sets together. Let me group them by query. So I do have an employee ID in my universe set of data and in my Excel spreadsheet here. So I'm going to merge on those dimensions. Now I've got my merged employee ID here. Now, in this case, I want to look at my vendors and compare them to my employees. I'm going to delete this table for space here. This table has all my vendor information in it, and I'm going to add my merge dimension and then start adding the employee information as well. All right. So after my vendor address, I'd like to bring in my employee address. But again, I'm going to have the same scenario where I have already objects from one query. And if I want additional dimensions from my second set of data, I have to make them details. So let's create an employee address field. That is a detail. And associate it with our merged employee ID. And here I can grab my employee address. All right, now it will allow me to bring this in. And I have this address, but still not an easy way to tell the difference in there. So there's a couple of things that I could do in here. One might be I can insert a column and just add a formula in here that says if the employee address equals the vendor address, then put something in this field. So we'll do that. If, and I want that employee, so if my employee address equals my vendor address, then, and in this case, I'm going to just write the word check. And I'll leave it there so that it's blank otherwise, okay? And so if I look through my data, I see this one set here, and it's for this employee ID 22. And I don't know who that is. So I'd like to add the employee name again here. We'll create another detail for employee and associate that with our merged employee ID. And this will be first name and last name with a space. Okay. So this Craig Ellis has the same address as Quantum Supply Shop. And that might be worth checking out. As Amanda mentioned, maybe it is allowed, maybe it's not allowed. So we would want to check that out. Another thing that we could do is add conditional formatting on here as well. And I could create a rule. Well, let me do a new rule. If my, no, I want to use my employee address. If my employee address is equal to my vendor address, vendor, there we go. Then, and red is good in this scenario, but I would like to make it bold as well. So I'll say, okay, there. Now it sticks out the name, and we could apply it across the board if we want to as well. just by applying that rule to additional columns as well. I'm clicking on the wrong one. There we go. Okay, so that would be a scenario where we can compare and highlight either using a formula. Then of course I could save this formula as a variable and filter for just this one to eliminate the clutter, of course, and have, let's see, employee with same address. And then I can create a filter for that. And in this case, I'll say is not null. Now, it eliminates the clutter and I can see just the one employee that should be checked or vendor that should be checked, and eliminates the rest of the clutter and focuses in on the one where we need to have that information. And then I could include additional, like add the employee phone number, give them a call, things like that. All right. But this would be a scenario where we could show that information. All right. Another way that we might think about getting that information would be a query on a query. So in this case, I wanted to show you, I've already prepared the report. My first query is going to have my Excel data, and my second query is going to have my InfoBurst data. And in this case, I said, well, I'll just create it again. Show me my vendor address in results from another query. So I want to choose my employee address from that previous query. In this case, I'm only going to pull up vendor information where the vendor address happens to be in that employee list. So I'll run that query. And now here I get my data. Here's the vendor address, and here's my employee address. And I could use similar formulas to point out the employee that had that same address. Okay. One little caveat with that, actually a couple to mention with that approach. Notice how I had my Excel query first. I don't have currently the option to use the query on a query method for Excel. So I only have that option results from another query if I'm using data from a InfoBurst here. I don't have query filter options on an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And then the other thing to be aware of that I've run up against before is that if that list is extremely long, then you run up against, I think by default, it has a limit of 1,000 list of values that it will search through, something like that. And that value can be upped in some of the settings, but it's something I've run into before. So it doesn't always work in every situation. So I wanted to mention that. But in a data set that's not really huge, this might be a nice, quick way to really focus in on the information that you're looking for. Okay. All right. And then the last scenario that I wanted to talk about is the Webby search options. So, I saved the wrong document. I want this one. All right. So in this first scenario, what I wanted to talk about is there's two different ways to do a search in Webby. One is at the report level, so on the block of data, and the other would be at the query level, okay? And the search words and wildcards that you use for them are different. And so that's why I wanted to point this out. So I'm going to start off with a report level search. So let's say we've been asked, show me a list of customers that bought monitors, okay? And as you can see, here's a monitor and here's another monitor. So the word monitor is kind of scattered in the word, and I don't want to just find each one of the names. I don't want to have to pick through the names. So I'm going to create a variable for that. So let's insert a new column here. And I'll start with an if statement. So if the product name, no, I want to say if match. So I'm looking for a match in my product name, and then semicolon. And then here's where I can use my wildcard. At the report level, the wildcard is a star. So I'm going to look for monitor. And notice how I'm putting the asterisk at the beginning and at the end and closing that. Then in this case, I'll say 1 else 0 in order to create a filter. Missing my quotation marks. There we go. All right, so I've got 1s and 0s here. Anytime I have a monitor where it finds monitor in the word. Okay. So one of the interesting things about the report level search using the match function is that it is case sensitive. So notice if I change this to a lowercase m and click that, now it doesn't find it here. So there's a couple of ways I could handle that. One might be, well, let's just look for a monitor. That would be one way to handle it. Then I eliminate that. But what if they capitalize the whole word in there? So this would be a more efficient way if I add an upper around the product name. So if I say upper product name, and that just converts the entire product name to uppercase. And then I will put all of this in uppercase. There. Now it finds monitor again, whether it's uppercase, lowercase, or mixed case, by converting this to upper and then searching for the uppercase monitor, then I can find that in there. Okay. So that's a very handy way of doing a search. Again, I can use the asterisk here at the beginning, at the end. If I leave it off the beginning, it's also, see, it's not finding it because none of my monitors actually start at the beginning of the word. So that's why I have to include the asterisk at the beginning. Okay. And then, of course, I can save this as a variable and filter for the ones. And then I could see my list of customers that that bought monitors. Here's all my monitor customers. All right. All right. So what if we wanted to look at it from the query level? Let me show you that. So I'm going to edit this query. Right now, we just have this one simple query and there's no query filters. But if I took my product name into this query filter here, we do have the matches pattern function in here. And if I just type monitor, so I'll put lowercase, or maybe I'll even, so can you find product name that matches the pattern of monitor? So without any wildcards, it doesn't find it because there's no product just with the name of monitor. So I have to include some wildcards in here. However, the wildcard at the query level is the % sign. So if I come over here and add the % in the front and at the end and run the query again, now I get my monitors. Let me go to this tab though, so you can see this table has no filters applied to it. See how there's no filters on here yet. This was just a plain report before I ran the query filter. The other interesting thing about at the query level is that it's not case sensitive. So if I change that to a lowercase m there and run the query, it still works and filters my data, and it finds all the monitors, upper or lowercase. So isn't that interesting? At the query level, it's not case sensitive and you use percentages as the wildcard. At the report level, you use asterisks. Okay, so let's do one other test on here. Let's say I have my list of customers here and I want to find, I have a lot of customers in here, 92 pages of customers in here. And someone says, I talked to a customer, I know his name was Mike or Michael, and his last name starts with an A, and that's all I remember. Can you find, can you narrow that list down? So let's look at that. So I'm going to take out that product name filter and bring in my customer. And in this case, I'm going to start with my, actually, we have this filter, last name begins with A. So that will narrow down to customers that have a last name of A. And then maybe if their first name is something like Mike or Michael, let's add that. So if we just start off with MI, and we stop there and go with a percentage and run that query. Okay, here's some Michaels and Mikes. And notice how we have uppercase and lowercase, mixed case Michael as well. And we do get a Mike, but we also get Miriam and Michelle and Ming. Okay, so we could do some additional filters in here. So let's say I know it was Mike or Michael. So I'm going to say matches pattern, and I'm just going to type Mike in here. And on this one, I'll say MIC. So we get down to the Mikes or Michaels. And I'm going to say it could be either one of those. So I'll add some indentation in there. And this does narrow it down quite a bit more. Now we have Michael, but we still have Michelle in here. So I could also add not, doesn't match pattern, and not include the Michelles. Okay, I'll bring in first name, customer first name again, and change this to a different from pattern, and we'll eliminate the Michelles. And run that. Okay. Looks like that worked. So this we could give this list. This is a nice, concise list, and you could go through here and see if any of these names help jog his memory on who the customer was that he was talking to. Okay, so that is the end of what I was going to talk about. Amanda, was there any additional comments that you wanted to bring up?
That variable detail, that was one that took me a long time to learn, and it's amazing. And seeing it again just makes my heart so happy, because I struggled for the longest time with merging my dimensions, and that one little thing of how to create that detail is a lifesaver. So for those who haven't seen it, you will use it a lot now.
Yes.
But no, I mean, as you can see, some of the stuff that I talked on in my presentation, a lot of the things you can do. Now, it takes a few steps, same as scripting in those other systems, to create a script or create conditional formatting or create a formula to do this analysis. But analysis can be done through this report writing system, and scheduling can be done through this system. Any process that you're doing repetitively, if you're taking just raw data and dumping it and then running it through a pivot or running it through something, this is the things that we need to build these reports for. So that way we, one, eliminate the human error, which happens, we all create mistakes, and two, saves time. We are doing more with less people today, more than ever. And if we can have a report do some work for us, we need to.
Yeah, that was awesome, Roxanne. I was quite fascinated by that. I mean, that difference in the search capability between the report and the query search, I almost wonder, with the recognition of upper lowercase, if that's not, a bug, or at least we should put in an enhancement request for that.
It's been that way for as long as I've been working with Web, for 16 years. For me,
yeah, in
that way.
But I loved the way you did the search there, and of course, I'd be one of those people who would do monitor, just because I just love that idea of an monitor. Monitor. That's a cool way to search for it. Yeah,
that was an easy way out. I loved it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, yeah, why not? And the examples earlier as well, I think it shows how powerful, and I know you talk about this a lot, Roxanne, but how powerful the formula editor is, because I think it gets overlooked. But you can do, just like you showed, some pretty amazing things in that formula editor. And it kind of makes it stand out amongst a lot of other tools on the marketplace today. So that's pretty good. Cool. Well, we didn't have any. I don't see anything in terms of questions. I see praise again. Thank you, Roxanne. In there as well. So that's good.
Thank you so much for taking my crazy questions and turning them into amazing reports.
Well, I think it emphasizes very clear. Well, actually, it demonstrates very clearly, Amanda, what what you were talking about can be done in Web Intelligence, and this was a great way to put these part one and part two together. I love it. Thank you both very much indeed.